The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched wider than any stadium on Earth. 300 alien species filled the chamber, their bodies shaped by 1,000 different worlds. Some floated in tanks of glowing liquid. Others clung to the ceiling with dozens of limbs. A few existed as clouds of organized particles that somehow maintained consciousness. In the center of this impossible gathering stood Captain Daejung, a human in a simple gray uniform that looked plain compared to the elaborate displays around him. Beside him, Ambassador Hana checked her tablet for the last time. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, reviewing 15 years of rejected proposals, ignored complaints, and dismissed concerns. Every document was marked with the same response: denied, postponed, or under review. Nothing ever changed. Nothing ever improved. Humanity had discovered faster than light travel by accident 15 years ago. A mining crew near Jupiter had activated an experimental drive and suddenly found themselves 30 light years from home. The discovery had changed everything. Within months, Earth had made contact with the vast civilization that spanned the galaxy. Humanity had been so excited, so hopeful. They thought they were joining a community of equals. They had been wrong. The Velthari Empire controlled the hyperspace lanes that connected star systems. Every human ship paid enormous fees just to travel between colonies. The costs were crushing, but humans paid because they had no choice. Without hyperspace, their scattered colonies would be isolated forever. The Quillian Confederacy had claimed mineral rights to regions where humans had already established mining operations. When Earth protested, the Quillians simply blockaded the sites with military ships. They cited ancient treaties written millions of years before humans had even evolved. The message was clear: your history doesn't matter here. The Mokran Collective broke contracts whenever it suited them. They hired human engineers and doctors, worked them for months, then refused payment. When humans complained, the Mokrans pointed to obscure clauses written in languages Earth scholars were still learning to read. The galactic legal system always sided with the older species. Daejung had spent 6 months preparing this presentation. He had documented everything with painful detail. Financial records showing the unfair fees, video evidence of Quillian harassment, medical reports from human workers exploited by the Mokrans. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. He began speaking. His voice was calm and professional, translated instantly into hundreds of languages by the chamber's advanced systems. He showed images of human colonies struggling under impossible debt. He played recordings of Quillian commanders threatening unarmed miners. He presented contracts that violated even the Council's own stated principles. The chamber responded with chittering laughter. High Chancellor Vrexus rose from his crystal throne. The Velthari leader stood 3 meters tall, his body made of living mineral that refracted light into rainbow patterns. His voice boomed through the hall like grinding stone. Your species discovered hyperspace barely 15 rotations ago. You expect equal treatment? You must earn your place through patience and obedience. Every species before you followed this path. The laws were established long before your kind learned to make fire. More laughter rippled through the chamber. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind adults make when a child says something naive. To them, humanity was throwing a tantrum about rules they simply didn't understand yet. Ambassador Hana stepped forward. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. We came here in good faith. We followed every protocol. We filed every form correctly. We asked only for fairness, not special treatment. Counselor Thex of the Quillians spoke next. The being's body was a mass of tentacles surrounding a central eye the size of a basketball. Those tentacles writhed with what humans had learned to recognize as amusement. And you have received our answer. Perhaps in another century, when you have proven yourselves worthy, we can discuss these matters again. Until then, accept your position with grace. Behind Daejung and Hana, the other human delegates began packing their materials. The sound of closing cases and shuffling papers created a strange silence in the vast chamber. Aliens who had been chittering and laughing suddenly fell quiet, confused by this unexpected behavior. Daejung gathered his tablet and looked up at the assembled council. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but the translation system carried it perfectly to every corner of the room. We came here seeking partners. We hope to find wisdom in your long histories and strength in cooperation. Instead, we found an empire that mistakes age for wisdom and numbers for strength. You believe that because you are old, you are right. You believe that because you are many, you are just. He paused, letting his words settle. Around the chamber, some aliens leaned forward, finally paying real attention. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council. We will no longer participate in this body. We will no longer seek your approval or follow your rulings. We will not attack you or interfere with your affairs. We simply choose to have nothing more to do with you. Ambassador Hana added her own statement. We wish you well. May your empires last another 1,000,000 years, but they will last without us. The human delegation walked toward the massive doors that sealed the chamber. Their footsteps echoed in the shocked silence. 300 species watched them leave, unable to process what had just happened. No one had ever simply walked away from the council before. It was unthinkable. At the doorway, Daejung turned back one final time. One more thing. Every human worker, technician, doctor, and engineer currently employed throughout the galaxy is being recalled to human territory. Effective immediately. They have 48 hours to reach the nearest human outpost. After that, you're on your own. The doors sealed behind them with a heavy thud that seemed to echo forever. Inside the chamber, chaos erupted. Species representatives shouted at each other in 100 different languages. Some demanded the humans be forced back. Others insisted they be punished for this disrespect. A few mostly smaller species who depended heavily on human technical support looked worried. High Chancellor Vrexus raised his massive crystalline arms, calling for order. When the noise finally settled, he spoke with complete confidence. Let them go. They will return within a month, begging for readmission. They need us far more than we need them. Without access to hyperspace lanes, their colonies will starve. Without our markets, their economy will collapse. This tantrum will pass, the council agreed. They voted to note humanity's withdrawal in the official records and moved on to other business. In the grand scheme of galactic politics, humanity was barely a footnote. One small species among thousands, throwing a fit that would be forgotten within a year. Not a single counselor understood what they had just done. Not one of them realized that the galaxy had just made the most expensive mistake in its long history. In the corridors outside the chamber, Ambassador Hana allowed herself a small smile. Do you think they suspect? Daejung shook his head. Not even slightly. They still think we're the ones who need them. Then let's show them the truth. They walked away from the council chambers, leaving behind centuries of tradition and the illusion of galactic unity. Behind them, the greatest civilization in the known universe continued its business, completely unaware that it had just begun to die. 3 months passed after humanity's departure from the Galactic Council. At first, nothing seemed to change. Trade continued. Ships traveled the hyperspace lanes. The galaxy's countless worlds spun through space as they always had. But slowly, like ice forming on a lake, something wrong began to spread through the Empire. The first signs appeared in the Velthari trade network. Ships that had always reached their destinations within days now took weeks. Hyperspace beacons, the invisible lighthouses that guided vessels between stars, started transmitting corrupted data. Navigation computers couldn't calculate safe routes. Captains found themselves forced to use slower, more dangerous paths through normal space. June stood on the bridge of his freighter, the Maiyang, watching a Velthari cargo ship drift helplessly in space. The massive vessel's distress beacon flashed red against the black void. His co-pilot Yuna looked up from her navigation screen. They're requesting assistance. Engine failure. They're offering 20,000 credits for a tow to the nearest station. June didn't even glance at the drifting ship. Log it in the record and continue on course. That's good money. We could use it. Not our problem anymore. Yuna started to argue, then stopped. She understood. For 15 years, human ships had been the galaxy's emergency response team. They fixed broken engines, rescued stranded crews, and maintained the technology that kept space travel safe. They did it because they were good at it, and because the galaxy paid well for those services. But the galaxy had also treated them like servants, like tools that existed only to make alien lives easier. Now the tools had been put away. This scene repeated across hundreds of star systems. Human rescue ships ignored distress calls. Human mechanics refused repair contracts. Human engineers stopped answering their communication channels. They weren't attacking anyone. They weren't breaking any laws. They were simply doing nothing at all. In the Quillian Confederacy's mining territories, panic was growing. The humans who maintained the atmospheric processors hadn't shown up for work. These processors were the only things keeping the mining colonies alive, transforming toxic atmospheres into breathable air. Quillian technicians tried to operate the machines themselves, but discovered a problem. The humans had reset everything to factory settings before leaving. All the manuals were written in obscure Earth languages: Korean, Finnish, Swahili, languages that few aliens had bothered to learn. The machines still worked, but the Quillians couldn't adjust them properly. Air quality in the colonies began to decline. Workers started getting sick. Production dropped 40% in the first week. By the second month, 3 colonies had been evacuated entirely. Counselor Thex watched the reports with growing horror. The tentacles around the being's central eye writhed in agitation. Thex had laughed at the humans during that final council meeting, had called them impatient children who needed to learn their place. Now those children had taken their toys and gone home, and the adults were discovering how much they had depended on those toys. In Mokran collective territory, the crisis was even worse. Hospitals across dozens of worlds faced complete collapse. Human doctors and medical technicians had been everywhere in Mokran space. They had been hired because of their strange talent for treating species completely different from themselves. An alien doctor specialized in their own biology and maybe 1 or 2 similar species. But humans could look at something with 6 hearts and acid for blood, study it for a few weeks, and figure out how to heal it. The Mokrans had called this talent acceptable adaptability, and paid humans poorly for it, always threatening to replace them with cheaper alternatives. Now those alternatives were proving useless. Mokran doctors could only treat Mokrans. The hundreds of other species living in Mokran territory were dying because there was no one left who could help them. Kira, Director of Earth Medical Services, received her 15th emergency contract offer that morning. Each one promised more money than the last. Triple salary, guaranteed housing, formal apologies for past treatment, full citizenship rights. She declined every single one. Her assistant Tae Min looked uncomfortable. "Director, people are dying." "Species that never did anything to us." "I know," Kira said quietly. "And that's terrible. But if we go back now, nothing changes. They'll use us until the crisis passes, then treat us the same way they always did. We have to wait until they're desperate enough to actually change their systems, not just make promises." On Earth, Fleet Admiral Wan studied the reports coming in from across the galaxy. The man's office overlooked the Pacific Ocean, where humanity's first starships had been built. On his desk lay casualty estimates, economic projections, and intelligence reports from 100 worlds. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Director Sua entered the office without knocking. The woman looked tired. "How long are we going to let this continue?" "The Perrin are facing extinction. Their entire species depends on atmospheric converters that only human engineers know how to maintain." "I know," one said, "and that's tragic. But the Perrin government voted with the Velthari at every council meeting. They supported every measure that hurt us. They benefited from the system that exploited human labor. Their children didn't vote for that." One turned away from the window. "No, they didn't. Neither did human children vote to be second-class citizens in the galaxy. Neither did young human colonists choose to grow up in debt because of unfair trade rules. This isn't about revenge, Sua. It's about leverage. We need the galaxy to understand that cooperation means treating us as equals, not as servants. And if they don't learn, then the galaxy burns and humanity survives alone. We were doing fine before we met them. We'll do fine after." But Juan didn't mention the reports sitting in his classified folder, the ones showing human casualties. Colonists caught in the chaos, unable to get home in time. Diplomats attacked by angry mobs who blamed humanity for their suffering. Traitors arrested on false charges. The strategy was working, but it had a price. Throughout the galaxy, the realization spread slowly. The Velthari had thought they controlled hyperspace, but it was human technicians who maintained the beacon network. The Quillians had thought they owned the mining colonies, but it was human engineers who kept them running. The Mokrans had thought they had the best medical system, but it was human doctors who treated 90% of the patients. Humanity hadn't been guests in the galactic community. They had been the foundation holding it together. And now that foundation had been removed. The third month of silence began. Trade networks continued to collapse. Medical systems continued to fail. The great Veltari Empire, which had dominated the galaxy for millions of years, saw its revenue drop by half. The Quillian Confederacy lost more colonies. The Mokran Collective couldn't stop counting the dead, and still, no human answered their calls. No human came to save them. The galaxy was learning a lesson that humanity had learned long ago. Back on Earth during its own violent history, the people you ignore, the people you exploit, the people you think you can do without, those are exactly the people you cannot survive without. High Chancellor Vrexus finally admitted what everyone was thinking. We need them back, whatever it takes. The Galactic Council chamber felt different this time. The same 300 species gathered, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Where before there had been casual arrogance, now there was fear. Where before there had been laughter at human concerns, now there was desperate silence. High Chancellor Vrexus tried to maintain order, but his crystalline voice cracked with strain. Representatives shouted at each other in dozens of languages. The translation system struggled to keep up with the chaos. Everyone wanted to speak. Everyone wanted someone else to blame. The numbers were devastating. The Quillian Confederacy had lost 14 mining colonies completely. Another 20 operated at less than 30% capacity. The economic damage measured in the trillions. The Mokran Collective reported 47,000 deaths in just 4 months. Most were from species whose biology only human doctors understood. The Velthari trade empire had contracted by 70%, throwing billions of beings into unemployment. But it was the smaller species that faced true catastrophe. The Piran had 8 weeks left before their atmospheric systems failed completely. They were methane breathers, requiring an environment that would kill most other species. Human engineers had designed and maintained the converters that made their colony worlds habitable. Without those engineers, the converters were breaking down. The Piran faced a choice between extinction and abandoning worlds their species had lived on for thousands of years. Representative Kelvis of the Piran stood before the council, her breathing apparatus wheezing audibly. We must force them to return. Invoke emergency protocols. Our children are suffocating. Councillor Thex's tentacles drooped with exhaustion. The Quillian had not rested properly in weeks, dealing with crisis after crisis. Force them with what? They've broken no laws. They've attacked no one. They simply stopped working for us. Our own regulations protect their right to withdraw labor. We wrote those laws to prevent slavery, and now those same laws protect them. That was the brilliance and cruelty of humanity's strategy. They had studied galactic law more carefully than species that had lived under it for millennia. They found every loophole, every protection, every right that had been designed to prevent exploitation. Now those same protections made it impossible to compel their return. On the human colony world of New Incheon, Governor Jiwoo hosted her 17th delegation that week. They came from all over the galaxy, bearing gifts and promises. They offered trade agreements, technology exchanges, formal apologies. Some offered territory. Some offered seats on their own governing councils. They were desperate, and that desperation showed in every gesture. Jiwoo listened politely to each one. She served them tea imported from Earth, a subtle reminder of human culture and capability. Then she sent them away with the same answer. The Daleth ambassador was particularly desperate. The being existed in a tank of specially treated water, but the purification systems were failing. The water had a visible brown tint that shouldn't be there. Please, I am begging you. Our people are dying from poison in our own homes. I understand your pain, Jiwoo said calmly. But let me ask you something. When my people came before your council asking for fair treatment, what did you do? The Daleth's fins drooped. We voted with the majority. You voted to maintain the systems that exploited us. You benefited when Velthari charged us unfair fees because it meant your own fees were lower. You profited when Quillians stole our mining claims because you bought the minerals cheaply. You saved money when Mokrans refused to pay human workers because it meant your own costs went down. Your comfort was built on our exploitation. But I personally did nothing. You voted. You participated. You accepted the benefits. That is not nothing. Jiwoo stood up, signaling the meeting was over. We are not refusing to negotiate. We are refusing to negotiate from weakness. Your government called us primitive. They laughed at our request for basic fairness. Now they can experience what the galaxy looks like without us. The ambassador left in despair, joining dozens of others camped outside the diplomatic quarter. They had nowhere else to go. Their own governments had sent them to beg, and they would keep begging until something changed. Meanwhile, Captain Daejung traveled to Threshold Prime, a neutral station that existed outside any single species territory. Fleet Admiral 1 had agreed to meet with a coalition of minor species here. These were the beings who had never actively hurt humanity. but who suffered now because the major powers were collapsing. The meeting room was crowded. Representatives from 47 species packed the space, all of them looking desperate. Most came from species with populations under 1 billion. They had no power in the council, but they would die just as surely as the powerful. Representative Kelvis of the Piran approached Dae-jung directly. Her breathing apparatus barely functioned, making horrible rattling sounds with each breath. Please, we have children. Babies who have never seen the council chambers, who never voted on anything. They are dying. Dae-jung felt something twist in his chest. These beings weren't his enemies. They were victims of the same system that had oppressed humanity. But they were also collateral damage in a war they hadn't started. I will bring your petition to Earth, he said finally. I cannot make promises. What he didn't tell her was that in human territory, engineers were already preparing aid packages. This had always been part of the plan. Let the galaxy burn enough to fear the flames, but not so much that everyone died. Humanity wanted leverage, not genocide. They wanted to be respected, not to be the villains. Back on Earth, the Terran Strategic Council met in secure chambers deep underground. The room held humanity's most powerful leaders, and they faced their most difficult decision. The Velthari are organizing a military response, reported Intelligence Director Hyun-woo. His face appeared on screens throughout the room, broadcasting from his office in Seoul. 3 battle fleets, 12 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, over 100 support vessels. It's the largest military force assembled in 3 centuries. Director Suwa looked sick. They're going to attack Earth? They're going to try intimidation first, Hyun-woo continued. Show up in force, demand we comply, threaten destruction if we refuse. Standard Imperial tactics. Fleet Admiral Wan's expression didn't change. He had been expecting this. Let them come. We're ready. We can't fight that many ships, Suwa protested. Our fleet is a fraction of that size. Wan smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We don't need to fight them. We just need to stop them. He explained the plan, and slowly the room full of leaders began to understand. For 15 years, humans had worked throughout the galaxy. They had maintained alien ships, repaired alien technology, learned alien systems. Every human technician who worked on a Velthari vessel had reported back to Earth intelligence. Every human engineer who maintained a hyperspace beacon had mapped the entire network. Humanity knew how everything worked. More importantly, they knew how to make it stop working. This is incredibly dangerous, Suwa said. If we do this, there's no going back. The galaxy will see us as a threat. The galaxy already sees us as a threat, Wan replied. They just don't know it yet. Better they learn now while we control the situation, than later when we might be too weak to defend ourselves. The vote was unanimous. Earth would not back down. The Velthari fleet began preparing for departure. High Chancellor Vrexis believed this show of force would end the crisis quickly. Humans would see the armada, understand their position, and return to their proper place. It never occurred to him that humanity had been preparing for this moment since the day they first left Earth. In orbit above Earth, human warships waited. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were not worried. They had something better than firepower. They had knowledge, preparation, and the element of surprise. The galaxy was about to learn what happens when you underestimate humanity. The Velthari Imperial fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system like a metal storm. 12 massive dreadnoughts led the formation, each one larger than a small moon. Behind them came 40 cruisers bristling with weapons. Support vessels filled the spaces between, creating a wall of military power that stretched across space. It was the largest attack force assembled in living memory, meant to overwhelm and terrify. High Chancellor Vrexis observed from his command throne aboard the flagship Eternal Dominion. The crystalline being's confidence radiated through the bridge. This show of force would end the human rebellion immediately. They would see the armada and understand the futility of resistance. By this time tomorrow, humans would be begging to return to the Council under any terms offered. But the solar system was quiet. Too quiet. No defense fleet scrambled to intercept them. No warning broadcast filled the communication channels. No desperate diplomats called begging for mercy. Earth simply waited, as if unaware or unconcerned that an invasion force sat on its doorstep. Scan for military installations, Vrexis commanded. The tactical officer's crystalline face flickered with confusion as data streamed across his screens. Chancellor, there are no orbital defense platforms, no weapon satellites, no military stations of any kind. The system appears completely undefended. Vrexus felt the first whisper of doubt. Humans were arrogant, but they weren't stupid. They had to know this fleet was coming. Intelligence had reported the Velthari military buildup for weeks. So where were Earth's defenses? The answer came suddenly and terribly. The hyperspace window behind the fleet collapsed. Not gradually as it should. Not in the controlled manner that allowed ships to retreat. It simply vanished like someone had switched off a light. The carefully calculated jump coordinates that should have allowed for emergency withdrawal were gone. Before Vrexus could process what had happened, alarms began shrieking across every ship in the fleet. On the Eternal Dominion's bridge, screens flashed red. Systems throughout the vessel started failing in cascade. Weapons wouldn't charge. Navigation computers showed random numbers. Life support systems flickered on and off. The same chaos erupted across the entire fleet. 43 ships reporting simultaneous system failures. Engineering teams scrambled to understand what was happening, but found nothing. No weapons fire, no electronic attack that their systems could detect. Their ships were simply destroying themselves from the inside. This is Fleet Admiral Wan of Earth Defense Command. The voice came through clearly on all channels, bypassing the fleet's communication security as if it didn't exist. You have violated our sovereign territory. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded or be destroyed. Vrexus finally understood, and the understanding brought cold terror. Show yourself, human. Instead of an answer, the bridge lights went out. Emergency systems failed to activate. Temperature controls shut down. In the vacuum of space, the massive dreadnought became a tomb in seconds. Only Vrexus's crystalline biology allowed him to survive without oxygen, but his crew began dying immediately. Across the fleet, similar catastrophes unfolded. Some ships lost artificial gravity. Others had their reactors surge toward overload. A few simply went dark, their crews trapped in absolute blackness with no power, no heat, and dwindling air. One's voice returned, still calm, still controlled. You are experiencing what we call hostile systems integration. For 15 years, human technicians worked throughout the galaxy. We maintained your ships, repaired your systems, and learned everything about your technology. Every weakness, every vulnerability, every backdoor that manufacturers built in and forgot about. The truth settled over the Velthari fleet like a shroud. Human engineers had worked on dozens of Velthari vessels over the years. They had been welcomed aboard because they were good at their jobs and didn't ask too many questions. But they had been documenting everything, learning, preparing. Every ship in your fleet is now under our control. One continued. We can vent your atmosphere. We can overload your reactors. We can simply let you drift until your supplies run out. Or you can surrender and live. This is an act of war. Vrexus managed to transmit, though his communication systems barely functioned. No, Chancellor. This is leverage. You came here to threaten us, to force us into submission through overwhelming power. Instead, you delivered yourself to our doorstep, and now you are helpless. Vrexus looked around his darkened bridge. His crew floated dead in zero gravity. The mighty flagship of the Velthari Empire was a corpse. The entire fleet had been neutralized in minutes without a single shot being fired. The humiliation was absolute. What are your terms? He asked quietly. Within 6 hours, every ship in the Velthari fleet had surrendered. Human boarding parties secured the vessels and stabilized their systems, saving thousands of lives. They treated prisoners with correct respect and provided medical care. They showed the professionalism and mercy that the Velthari had never shown them. News of the defeat spread through the galaxy faster than light. The Velthari Empire, which had dominated hyperspace for millions of years, had been destroyed without firing a weapon. The implications terrified everyone. If humanity could do this to the Velthari, what could they do to anyone else? The Quillian Confederacy immediately recalled its own military forces, afraid they would be next. The Mokran Collective froze all hostile actions against human interests. Smaller species that had been considering military options abandoned those plans entirely. Ambassador Hana returned to the Galactic Council chambers for the first time in 6 months. The assembled representatives looked at her with expressions that ranged from fear to desperate hope. The great chamber that had once dismissed humanity now hung on every word she spoke. We are prepared to negotiate a return to galactic cooperation, Hana announced, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, but not under the old terms. Never under the old terms, she outlined humanity's demands. Equal representation on the council with full voting rights. Unrestricted access to hyperspace lanes at fair rates. Protection of human colonies under galactic law. Reparations for 15 years of discriminatory practices. And most importantly, immediate reforms to the laws that had allowed major powers to exploit minor species. And if we refuse? Counselor Thex asked, though the being's voice held no strength. Then we continue as we are. Your economies collapse. Your people suffer. We've proven we don't need the galaxy. The question is whether the galaxy can survive without us. The chamber erupted in protests, but they were weak and brief. Everyone knew the truth. Humanity held all the leverage now. They had the knowledge to cripple galactic civilization, and they had proven their willingness to use it. But Hana noticed something interesting. The smaller species representatives, the ones who had been exploited almost as badly as humanity, were nodding. They saw an opportunity in this chaos. If humanity could break the old power structure, maybe everyone could benefit. Director Sua had already been meeting with these minor species separately, away from the council's attention. She offered them something revolutionary. Direct partnership with humanity that bypassed the council entirely. Fair trade agreements, technical assistance without exploitation, educational exchanges, medical support. It was a brilliant strategy. The council's power had always rested on unity. It maintained control by forcing everyone to work through established channels. Now humanity offered an alternative. Species could continue following the old system and suffer, or they could partner with humanity directly and thrive. Within 2 weeks, 19 species had signed bilateral agreements with Earth. They would receive humanitarian aid and technical support immediately. In exchange, they would vote with humanity on council matters. The balance of power had fundamentally shifted. High Chancellor Vrexus, now stripped of his fleet and his pride, faced an impossible choice. He could continue resisting and watch the Velthari Empire crumble completely, or he could accept the new reality and try to salvage what remained. He chose survival, as humanity had known he would. The Galactic Council met one final time under the old system. The vote was nearly unanimous. Humanity's terms were accepted in full. The reforms they demanded would be implemented immediately. The age of exploitation was over. As Hana left the chamber, she allowed herself a small smile. They had won. Not through violence or conquest, but through preparation, patience, and the willingness to walk away. The galaxy would never dismiss humanity again. 1 year had passed since humanity walked out of the Galactic Council. Now Ambassador Hana stood before that same council, but everything had changed. The Great Chamber had been restructured, both literally and politically. The major empires no longer dominated the central positions. Instead, smaller species sat in places of equal influence, and humanity's delegation occupied a strategic position in the heart of the assembly. Hana looked out at the gathered representatives. Some of them had laughed at her a year ago. Others had dismissed human concerns with casual arrogance. Now they listened with respect, and if some of that respect was born from fear, that was acceptable. Fear and respect often look the same from the outside. The last year has taught us all a valuable lesson, she began, her words translated into hundreds of languages. Interdependence is not weakness. Cooperation is not submission. And underestimating others is not wisdom. It is simply foolishness that eventually demands payment. The reforms humanity pushed through were comprehensive and revolutionary. Hyperspace lanes became public infrastructure, managed by a coalition of species rather than controlled by the Veltari alone. The fees were standardized and fair, calculated by actual maintenance costs rather than arbitrary imperial pricing. Small trading vessels paid the same rates as large ones. Trade regulations were completely rewritten. The old system had favored species with ancient claims and historical precedents. The new system recognized current occupation and actual use. Human mining colonies that the Quillians had tried to claim were legally confirmed as human territory. Contracts had to be honored regardless of species, with enforcement mechanisms that couldn't be ignored. Most importantly, forced labor and exploitative contracts were outlawed. The very practices that had been used against humanity now protected everyone. Workers had rights that couldn't be waived. Species couldn't be excluded from opportunities based on age or origin. The Council itself gained enforcement powers it had never possessed. Ensuring these protections actually meant something. Captain Dae-jung stood on the rebuilt Piran colony world of Methane Prime, watching human engineers work alongside Piran technicians. The atmospheric converters hummed smoothly now, maintaining the precise environment the Piran needed to survive. But this time, the Piran were learning to maintain the systems themselves. Representative Kelvis approached him, her breathing apparatus functioning perfectly. The Piran had been hours from extinction when human aid finally arrived. They would never forget that terror, or the relief when human ships appeared with supplies and engineers. "You saved us," she said quietly. "We will never forget." Dae-jung shook his head. "We didn't do it for gratitude. We did it because it was right, but also because partnerships built on genuine respect are stronger than empires built on exploitation. We need you to be strong and independent. That benefits everyone." The Piran weren't the only species receiving this treatment. Throughout the galaxy, human technical teams worked on humanitarian missions. They taught rather than simply fixing problems. They shared knowledge instead of hoarding it. It was a deliberate strategy. A galaxy of capable, independent species would be more stable and prosperous than one dominated by a few ancient empires. The Velthari Empire struggled to adapt to the new reality. High Chancellor Vrexus had been replaced by a coalition government that understood survival required change. They could no longer dominate through control of hyperspace. Instead, they had to compete on equal terms with everyone else. It was humiliating, but it was also necessary. Many Velthari citizens found the transition difficult. They had believed their empire was eternal, their dominance natural and right. Now they were just one species among many, with no special privileges. Some adapted. Others retreated into isolation, nursing grudges that would last generations. But slowly, painfully, Velthari society began to change. On Earth, Fleet Admiral Wan walked through the memorial garden dedicated to the Silent Months. Stone markers bore the names of those who had died during humanity's withdrawal, colonists caught in the chaos and unable to reach safety, diplomats attacked by angry mobs, traitors arrested on false charges and left to die in alien prisons. The strategy had worked, but it had cost lives. Governor Jiwoo joined him among the memorial stones. "Was it worth it?" she asked softly. One was quiet for a long moment. "That's not for us to decide. History will judge whether our methods justified the outcome. We did what we thought necessary to ensure humanity's survival and dignity, and if we had been wrong, then we would have been monsters instead of liberators." The line between the two is thinner than anyone wants to admit. We gambled that the galaxy needed us more than we needed them. If we had been wrong, millions would have died and humanity would have been blamed forever. Throughout the galaxy, human presence had transformed completely. No longer were they the eager newcomers desperate for acceptance. Now they were respected partners, sometimes feared but always acknowledged. Human engineers, doctors, diplomats, traders, and soldiers worked on hundreds of worlds, but on terms of equality rather than exploitation. Intelligence Director Hyunwoo presented the latest briefing to Earth's leadership. 29 species have requested human military advisors. 68 won educational exchanges. The Quillians are teaching us their advanced metallurgy in return for our medical knowledge. Real partnerships are forming. But not everyone accepted the new order peacefully. Extremist factions among the older species called humanity tyrants and usurpers. They organized terrorist attacks designed to prove that humans were as fallible and destructive as anyone else. A bomb exploded on the human colony of New Busan, killing 47 people, including children. The response came not just from Earth, but from a dozen species who had benefited from the new galactic order. Quillian investigators tracked the extremists. Piran intelligence provided crucial data. Mokran security forces arrested the conspirators. The message was clear: attack humanity, and you attacked the coalition they had built. The extremists were tried under the new galactic legal system, which applied equally to all species. They were convicted and imprisoned. No one was tortured. No one was executed. Justice was carried out professionally and fairly, which somehow made it more powerful than any brutal revenge. Ambassador Hana stood in her quarters overlooking Earth's diplomatic district, reading reports from across the galaxy. The transition would take decades to complete. There would be setbacks and conflicts. Some species would never accept the new order. Old grudges would flare into violence. The work of building a truly fair galactic civilization had only begun. But for the first time since humanity had reached for the stars, they negotiated from a position of genuine equality. They were no longer the supplicants begging for scraps. They were partners with full voices in shaping the galaxy's future. A message arrived from the Galactic Council, an invitation to chair the upcoming summit on frontier exploration and resource management. It was a position that had always gone to the Velthari, symbolizing their control over expansion and territory. Now it was being offered to humanity. Hana considered the invitation carefully. This was what they had fought for, but it was also a test. Could humanity wield power without becoming what they had fought against? Could they lead without exploiting? Could they remember what it felt like to be dismissed and ignored? She accepted the position, but added a note suggesting the role rotate among species every few years. Even this small gesture mattered. Power should serve everyone, not concentrate in the hands of a few. In the memorial garden, Wan and Jiwoo watched the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. "Do you think we'll be remembered as heroes or villains?" Jiwoo asked. "Both, probably," Wan replied. "History is never simple. We did terrible things for good reasons. We let people die to prove a point. We held humanitarian aid hostage to force political change. Those actions can't be erased by good outcomes. But the outcomes were good. Yes, the galaxy is more fair now. Species that were exploited have real protections. Smaller civilizations have actual voices. The Age of Empire is ending, replaced by something better. But we paid for that with lives, both human and alien. That debt never goes away." They stood in silence as darkness fell. Above them, stars filled the sky. Somewhere out there, on thousands of worlds, humans and aliens worked together as genuine equals. Children of dozens of species learned together in schools that taught mutual respect. Trade flowed fairly. Medical care reached everyone who needed it. Justice applied to all. The galaxy had learned to respect humanity, but at a cost that would echo through history. Future generations would debate whether that cost was justified. They would study the silent months in their history classes, trying to understand the complex mix of courage, cruelty, wisdom, and ruthlessness that had reshaped galactic civilization. But one thing was certain. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again, and humanity would never forget what it felt like to be dismissed, to be exploited, to be treated as less than equal. That memory would shape their choices for centuries to come, ensuring that when they wielded power, they wielded it with the wisdom that came from having once been powerless. The new order had been established. Now came the harder work of maintaining it, of living up to the ideals they had fought for, of proving that the suffering had not been in vain.